Imagine a country that has nearly doubled its core development score.
Right, like a massive statistical leap.
Exactly. We are talking about an explosive 77.3% jump over 3 decades.
That's huge on paper.
It really is. If you look at the cover page of the source material we're digging into today, there's this visual, a stark white background with a massive black question mark right in the center.
Yeah, that graphic really grabs you.
It does. On the left, you see their Human Development Index, or HDI, in 1990, sitting at 0.282.
And then on the right, the 2023 score is exactly 0.500.
Right, with this big upward arrow connecting them, shouting about the 77% growth.
It looks like an absolute masterclass in national progress, right?
It completely does. But, and here's the cognitive dissonance, you step away from that spreadsheet,
Right.
you walk out into the real world, and you realize that right now, today, 2/3 of that exact same population is trapped in multidimensional poverty.
66.2% to be exact.
Yeah. So the mission for our deep dive today is to answer that massive black question mark. How is it physically possible to grow so much on paper, but change so little in reality?
It is the ultimate statistical illusion, isn't it?
Totally.
We're so culturally conditioned to see a line moving up and to the right on a graph, and we just automatically assume human suffering is going down and to the left.
We just take it for granted.
Exactly. But human development isn't just some simple algebraic equation where one variable directly controls the other. It's a highly complex, often completely contradictory ecosystem.
And that contradiction is exactly what we have sitting on the table in front of us today. We are unpacking a dense 15-page academic data set.
Right, a really comprehensive look specifically at the Republic of Guinea.
Yeah, Guinea. And what's wild about this data set is that it tracks, well, basically everything. Life expectancy, carbon footprint, schooling, income, all the way from 1990 up to 2023.
And what's fascinating here is that the data doesn't just show us what is happening. If we look closely enough at the gaps between the numbers, it tells us exactly why it's happening.
Because the top line figures are kind of lying to us, right?
Or at least they're telling a very incomplete truth. I mean, we have this terrible habit in global economics of looking at a single national average and just declaring victory.
Checking the box and moving on.
Right. But what this specific data set forces you to do is look at the structural bottlenecks. It forces us to look at the historical anchors that keep a population grounded, even while the national average tries to take flight.
Okay, so let's get into those numbers, because we have to define what this growth actually is. We were talking about the HDI.
The Human Development Index, yeah.
And just to be clear, for everyone joining us, we aren't just talking about GDP or money here.
No, not at all. HDI is a composite score.
Right. It essentially asks 3 basic questions about a country. How long do people live? How much education do they get? And what is their basic standard of living?
Health, knowledge, and wealth.
Exactly. So in 1990, Guinea's HDI was 0.282. By 2023, it climbed to 0.500. That's the 77% relative growth.
But then you have to zoom out.
You do. I looked at the world map infographic in the report, and the global average HDI right now sits at 0.756.
Which leaves Guinea ranking 179th globally.
Out of, what, 193 nations?
Exactly. So they are still in what the data classifies as the extreme low human development tier.
Okay, let me try to wrap my head around this. It's almost like it's like a student who doubled their test score from a 20% to a 40%.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. Like, yes, the individual progress is really commendable. You studied hard, you doubled your score, but you are still failing the class when the global average is a 75%.
It's a solid analogy, but I would actually push it even further because it's not just about the scale of the number. It's about the type of growth.
What do you mean by type of growth?
Well, let's look at that specific gap between Guinea's 0.500 and the global average of 0.756.
Okay, so that's a 0.256 difference.
Right, a 0.256 chasm. And when you look at an index that only runs from 0 to 1, a gap of that size isn't just a statistical distance. It represents a completely different dimension of human existence.
So the percentage growth is sort of blinding us.
Exactly. When you see a 77% increase, your brain confuses velocity with position.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Guinea is moving faster relative to its own past, sure. But in absolute terms, a score of 0.5 keeps it firmly anchored at the bottom.
So what you're saying is that the first 77% was, relatively speaking, the easy part.
Well, I wouldn't call it easy, but it is fundamentally different mechanically. To go from 0.282 to zero point 0.5, Guinea had to harvest the low-hanging fruit of development.
The basics, right.
Yeah, think about it. If a village has literally zero vaccines and you initiate a basic vaccination program, childhood mortality just plummets.
Makes sense.
Or if you have no schools and you build just a few primary schools, your enrollment percentage skyrockets.
Because the baseline was basically zero.
Precisely. Those interventions yield massive percentage gains. But closing the next gap, crossing that 0.256 chasm to reach the global average, that requires institutional transformations that are exponentially harder.
Because you can't just drop off boxes of vaccines anymore.
Right. Now you have to build a complex, self-sustaining medical infrastructure.
Okay, that makes total sense. You are moving from importing basic survival to actually having to generate internal complex systems.
Exactly.
And you can see that struggle so clearly when you rip the HDI apart into its three pillars. I want to look at health and wealth first, because the mechanism of how these two interact in Guinea is fascinating.
It really is. The source material has this incredible composite line chart tracking this.
Yes. Let's start with the health data on that chart. In 1990, life expectancy in Guinea was 47.3 years.
Just 47. We really need to pause on that number.
It's staggering.
It is. When you read that, it forces you to ask what a society even looks like under those conditions.
Right, because it doesn't mean everyone magically drops dead on their 47th birthday.
No, of course not. But it means child mortality is so devastatingly high and adult survival is so precarious that turning 50 is a statistical rarity.
It fundamentally changes the structure of a family.
Absolutely.
I mean, if the elders aren't there, you lose all that generational knowledge. You lose the grandparents who can watch the kids while the parents work. The entire burden of survival is just dumped on the young.
Exactly. So the jump to almost 61 years by 2023, that represents a monumental shift in the fabric of their society.
Grandparents actually get to see their grandchildren.
Right. And institutional knowledge is preserved slightly longer in the workforce. But as you pointed out earlier, the global average is over 73 years.
So there's still a nearly 13-year gap with the rest of the world.
Which tells us the core mechanism of their health system is still broken.
They got the low-hanging fruit, but not the infrastructure.
Exactly. People might not be dying as frequently from easily preventable childhood diseases, but the complex medical access required to manage chronic conditions or handle emergencies is largely absent.
And speaking of emergencies, as I was combing through this health data, there was a really specific detail that jumped out at me. I honestly thought the data was flawed at first.
Oh, the 2014 data.
Yes. I was looking at the area chart for 2014, 2015, and 2016. For anyone familiar with West African history, you know the Ebola epidemic hit that region, and Guinea specifically, incredibly hard during that exact window.
It was a horrific international crisis.
It was. So I went to the data expecting to see this massive jagged cliff. I expected a huge collapse in life expectancy on the chart.
But it's not there.
It's not. The actual numbers barely flinched. Life expectancy in 2014 was 57.58. In 2015, it crept up to 57.89.
And in 2016, it went up slightly again.
Yeah, to 58.49. How is that possible? Does the data just, I don't know, miss the deaths?
No, the data captures it perfectly. Yep. But what you are seeing is a phenomenon demographers sometimes call the tragedy of a high baseline.
The tragedy of a high baseline. Okay, what does that mean?
Well, you expected a crater in the graph because you are viewing it from the perspective of a highly developed health system.
Right. Like if Ebola happened in London or Tokyo, the life expectancy chart would just absolutely plummet.
Precisely. Because in those places, background mortality is very low. But in Guinea, the baseline mortality from every day causes malaria, malnutrition, lack of basic maternal care, waterborne diseases. It was already so stubbornly high.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So the Ebola virus, as lethal and horrific as it was, simply joined a very crowded field of systemic killers.
Wow.
There's no massive statistical drop because the broader slow-moving improvements in general health marginally outpaced the acute, localized spikes in Ebola mortality.
That is just chilling.
It is. It's not a picture of a robust health system fighting off a virus. It's a picture of grim, agonizingly slow resilience. Everyday life is so dangerous that an apocalyptic plague barely registers as a statistical blip.
The tragedy of a high baseline. That
Yeah.
is going to stick with me.
The heavy concept.
It really is. And, if the health progress is that kind of grueling trudge, the economic progress is, honestly, it's just baffling.
The income data is rough.
Let's look at it. The data tracks gross national income, or GNI, per capita, and it's adjusted for purchasing power.
Right, PPP.
Yeah, and just to be clear for you listening, when we say adjusted for purchasing power, we aren't just doing a straight currency conversion into US dollars.
No, that would distort the reality.
Exactly. We are looking at what that money actually buys on the ground in Guinea, like loaf of bread, paying rent, basic goods. We are leveling the playing field.
So what are the numbers?
In 1990, that adjusted GNI per capita was $1,993. In 2023, it's $3,494.
While the global average is over $20,000.
Right. So over 33 years, Guinea added roughly $1,500 to its per capita income.
If you do the math on that, it's an average addition of less than $50 a year.
I just don't understand the mechanics of that. I mean, if people are living almost 14 years longer, shouldn't they be working longer?
You would think so.
Shouldn't a larger, healthier workforce be generating exponentially more wealth? How do you add only $50 a year during a 3-decade period that saw the global internet boom and massive global wealth creation?
Well, you are assuming that a longer life automatically equals economic productivity.
Doesn't it?
Not necessarily. What happens when you lower child mortality and increase life expectancy without simultaneously creating an industrialized job market?
Oh, you get a lot of people with nowhere to work.
Exactly. You get a massive youth bulge. You have millions of young, relatively healthier people entering a labor market that consists almost entirely of subsistence agriculture and informal, low-wage labor.
So they aren't participating in the global economic acceleration at all.
No, because the structural capital simply isn't there to employ them. They are living longer, yes, but they're just surviving. The economy isn't scaling to catch them.
Which brings us right into the third pillar of the HDI. And honestly, this is the most shocking part of this entire data set.
The education data.
Yes, this is the bottleneck that explains exactly why the economy isn't scaling. Let's talk about the knowledge chasm.
There's a really stark dual-axis chart in the report detailing this.
Yeah, let's break that chart down. The data tracks something called mean years of schooling. That means how many years of education the average adult 25 and older has actually completed.
Right, the actual adults in the workforce.
In 1990, it was 1.31 years. In 2023, the mean years of schooling in Guinea grew to just 2.486 years.
Meanwhile, the global average is nearly 9 years.
I mean, think about the practical, mechanical reality of that number. A mean of 2.5 years means the average adult driving the Guinean economy today effectively has a second or third grade education.
They are barely crossing the threshold of basic literacy.
But wait, I was looking at that same dual axis chart, and there's a second education metric right next to it. Expected years of schooling.
Yes. EYS.
Right, and this measures how many years a child entering the school system today is expected to receive. And that number in Guinea has risen from 2.69 in 1990 all the way to 10.39 in 2023.
It looks like a massive victory.
It does. If you just glance at that line going up, you think, okay, problem solved. Expected schooling is over 10 years. The future looks incredibly bright.
I'm really glad you brought that up because that is exactly the trap of looking at leading versus lagging indicators in development data.
Leading versus lagging.
Yeah. Expected years of schooling is a leading indicator. It measures the potential of the children entering the system right now. But the mean years of schooling is a lagging indicator.
Because it measures the reality of the adults who are actually in the workforce today.
Exactly.
I was trying to come up with an analogy for this, and it feels like a software update.
Okay, I like where this is going.
It's like a massive corporation announcing, great news, we just bought state-of-the-art AI computers for the entire office. That's your expected schooling.
Right.
But the actual employees sitting at the desks today, the people who have to run the company right now, only know how to use a mechanical typewriter. That's your mean schooling.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
The potential of tomorrow's technology doesn't fix the fact that today's supply chain is fundamentally broken.
Because the timeline lag of human capital is entirely unforgiving. The people who need to build the bridges, program the digital economy, run the logistics networks, and staff the healthcare system right this second, they are bound by that 2.5-year average.
So how do you attract foreign direct investment with that?
You generally don't. If a multinational company wants to build a manufacturing plant in Guinea, But the available labor pool requires fundamental literacy training before you can even begin specialized job training.
The company just goes to another country.
Exactly. It's a total paralyzer. You can pour billions of dollars of foreign aid into physical infrastructure. But if the local human capital isn't there to maintain it and manage it, that infrastructure just depreciates and crumbles.
Even if every single child in Guinea received 12 years of pristine, world-class education starting tomorrow morning.
It would take a full generation, 2 to 3 decades, for that knowledge to fully age into and transform the macroeconomic workforce.
So the 2.5-year mean we see today is literally the ghost of policies and deprivations from the 1990s actively haunting the economy of 2023.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, but we have to go deeper than averages because, as we've already established, averages are an illusion.
They absolutely are.
So what happens when the mask comes off? This data set contains an entirely different metric called the inequality-adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
And this is where the real gut punch of this report lands.
It really is. There is this cascading waterfall chart in the report. When you take Guinea's 0.5 HDI score and you mathematically adjust it to account for how unevenly that health, wealth, and education are actually distributed across the population,
The score completely plummets.
it drops to 0.302. That is an overall loss of 39.6%.
In development economics, we call this the inequality tax.
The inequality tax. And to put that nearly 40% loss in perspective, if we look globally, the average loss a country takes due to inequality is about 21.9%.
So Guinea's loss is almost double the global average.
It's not just a statistical deduction then, it is a literal theft of national potential.
Exactly.
It means that the 77% growth we were celebrating at the very beginning of this deep dive, the vaccines, the new schools, the added income, was largely captured by a specific, narrow segment of the society.
It forces us to acknowledge that the average Guinean does not exist. There are two completely separate realities existing in the exact same geographic space.
And the data shows us exactly where that inequality tax is being levered the hardest, right?
Yes, there's a stacked bar chart breaking it down.
Let's look at that. Inequality in income is 31.6%. Inequality in life expectancy is 35.4%. But the absolute hammer blow,
Inequality in education,
a staggering 50.1%.
50.1%.
Yeah.
Let's connect that back to the 2.5 years of average schooling we just talked about.
Right, because if the inequality rate is over 50%, that shatters the whole concept of the average.
Exactly. It doesn't mean everyone goes to school until 3rd grade and then drops out together.
Right.
It means a tiny, concentrated fraction of the population, likely urban elites, goes to private schools, maybe studies abroad in Europe, and holds university degrees.
While the vast, overwhelming majority
Holds literally 0 years of schooling. They never step foot inside a classroom. They cannot read a contract, they cannot verify a bank statement, and they cannot access public health literature.
I really want you, the listener, to linger on what that actually feels like on the ground. Imagine your own society, your own city, if literally half of all educational resources and outcomes were hoarded by the top 1%.
It's hard to even picture.
How quickly would your local economy, your innovation, your social mobility just grind to an absolute halt? It creates a structural underclass that is entirely permanently dependent on the elites.
And that dependency, that lack of agency, is exactly what breeds the next metric we need to examine.
The poverty data.
Yes, because if you have 0 years of schooling, you are locked out of the formal economy.
Oh.
And that brings us to the multidimensional poverty index, or the MPI.
Because poverty, in this specific context, is not just a lack of money.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It is a state of perpetual overlapping vulnerability.
Which brings us right back to that mind-bending paradox from our hook. 66.2% of the population lives in multidimensional poverty.
With an intensity of 56.4%.
Looking at this MPI methodology, this is completely different from how we usually think about poverty, right? Usually the headline is just living on less than $2 a day.
Right, the traditional monetary metric.
But this MPI looks like a checklist of human misery. If you don't have a toilet and you don't have electricity, you trigger this index. Am I reading that infographic right?
You are. The Multidimensional Poverty Index was a revolutionary shift in how we measure human suffering. It moves away from purely financial metrics and looks at overlapping deprivations at the household level.
So it's looking at the actual lived experience.
Exactly. It asks, is this family deprived in health, in education, and in basic living standards simultaneously? It looks at a basket of 10 specific indicators. If a household is deprived in a third or more of these indicators, they are classified as multidimensionally poor.
And the source data gives us the exact, devastating recipe for this poverty in Guinea. It breaks down what is actually contributing to the MPI.
And the biggest drivers aren't even the lack of cash.
No. Years of schooling contributes 20.6% to their poverty score. School attendance contributes 17.8%. And nutrition contributes 16.0%.
This completely rewrites the narrative of how to fix poverty. I hear this argument all the time. Why don't we just institute a universal basic income? Just give people cash.
Right, just distribute the wealth.
But if you just dropped a UBI of cash into Guinea tomorrow, you would certainly alleviate some immediate acute suffering, but you wouldn't automatically solve the multidimensional poverty.
Because it's a supply-side failure. You can have a pocket full of cash, but you can't buy your way out of a broken educational system if the school literally hasn't been built.
Exactly.
You can't buy nutritious food if the agricultural supply chains don't exist.
Cash doesn't magically manifest a power grid. And if we look at the standard of living data in the report, it paints such a visceral, tactile picture of what it means to be in that 66%.
It really does.
To be part of that statistic means you are likely deprived of clean cooking fuel, which contributes 9.8% to the index. You are deprived of basic sanitation, an 8.3% contributor, and you lack electricity, a 7.3% contributor.
Let's make those percentages real for a second. Lack of clean cooking fuel means you are cooking over an open, smoky wood fire inside your home, breathing in particulate matter that damages your lungs on a daily basis.
Every day.
Lack of sanitation means you are managing human waste without modern plumbing, exposing your entire family to cholera and dysentery. Lack of electricity means when the sun goes down, your day ends. You have no reliable light to read, to study, or to work by.
And this is where the overlapping nature of the MPI becomes a literal snare. These deprivations act as a closed loop. They reinforce each other. Well, you can't improve your education because you're sick from the contaminated water and you have no light to study by at night. You can't improve your sanitation because you lack the education to secure a high-paying job that would allow you to move to an area with plumbing.
It's a cyclical trap that money alone cannot break.
Precisely.
Now, when we talk about cooking over an open fire and hauling water because there's no plumbing, we have to ask a really uncomfortable question.
Whose labor is actually making up for that lack of infrastructure?
Exactly. Who is fetching the water? Who is gathering the wood? The data points directly to the women and girls, and that means we absolutely have to look at the gender divide.
We do, sidelining half the team. The source data provides both the Gender Development Index, the GDI, and the Gender Inequality Index, the GII.
And it is impossible to understand Guinea's HDI gap without understanding this specific inequality.
There's a mirror bar chart in the report that makes this visually undeniable.
Right. Comparing the male and female HDI scores. The GDI value for Guinea is 0.820, which ranks them 156th out of 194 countries.
Basically, it shows that female development levels are roughly 82% of male development levels.
But the GII, the Gender Inequality Index, is where the structural reality gets really dark. There's a radar chart showing these dimensions. This index measures the loss of potential human development due to disparities between female and male achievements.
Let's look at the health metric here, the maternal mortality ratio.
Globally, the maternal mortality ratio is 216 deaths per 100,000 live births, which, by the way, global health organizations already consider to be unacceptably high.
Right. But our sources indicate that Guinea's MMR is an astronomical 553 deaths per 100,000 live births.
553.
Let's contextualize that number. A rate that high means that giving life is one of the most statistically dangerous things a woman can do in that country.
That's horrifying.
It implies a severe, systemic lack of emergency obstetric care, a lack of skilled birth attendants, and chronic prenatal malnutrition.
And the data also notes a high adolescent birth rate, right?
Yes, 111.6 births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19.
So you are looking at a system that pulls girls out of that expected years of schooling pipeline we talked about earlier and throws them into a high-risk medical environment before they've even reached adulthood.
If we connect this to the macroeconomic picture, It stops being just a conversation about human rights, though that is obviously paramount, and becomes purely objective math.
The labor force numbers, you mean?
Yes, the data shows that in Guinea, female labor force participation is around 47%, while male participation is way up at 68.2%.
I look at those numbers and I just think, how can you possibly expect to close a 0.256 HDI gap with the rest of the world if your institutional barriers are physically and economically preventing half of your population from fully participating?
You can't. It is a massive self-inflicted economic wound. If half of your intellectual and labor potential is statistically throttled by a lack of education, massive mortality risks, and exclusion from the formal labor force, your maximum economic velocity is cut in half before you even step onto the global playing field.
The data is entirely ruthless on this point.
It is. Nations that fail to empower women mathematically cap their own HDI growth.
I did notice one tiny glimmer of structural reform in the data, though, looking at the donut chart for the political sphere.
The parliamentary seats.
Yeah. Female representation in parliament jumped from roughly 16.7% up to 29.6% in the 2022-2023 window.
That is a critical data point. That jump in representation is a leading indicator of institutional change. When women are in the room where the budgets are written and the policies are made, you start to see investments shift toward maternal health and girls' education.
But again, those are lagging indicators.
Exactly. The health and labor data will take years, maybe decades, to catch up to that political shift.
Okay, we've looked at the economic bottlenecks, the brutal inequality tax, and the gender divide. But there is one final, totally counterintuitive paradox hidden in the back of this report.
The environmental data.
And I'm not going to lie, this completely blew my mind and changed how I think about environmentalism. It's the planetary pressures adjusted HDI, or the PHDI.
This is a relatively new but absolutely essential way of looking at development.
How does it work?
Well, traditional HDI just looks at the ledger and says, look how rich and healthy this nation is. PHDI comes in and audits the environmental cost. It says, yes, you are rich and healthy, but did you have to melt the ice caps, strip mine your forests, and pollute the oceans to achieve it?
So I go to the data for Guinea. I'm looking at their environmental impact. Their carbon dioxide emissions are an incredibly low 0.285 tons per capita.
Very low.
To put that in perspective, the global average is up around 4.54 tons. Because Guinea's emissions are so minuscule, their PHDI penalty, the amount their overall development score is reduced because of environmental damage, is only 2.4%.
Compare that to the world average PHDI penalty, which is a massive 10.1%.
Exactly. Guinea's material footprint is also very low, slowly rising from 3.3 tons in 1990 to just 4.1 tons in 2023. So initially, I'm looking at this bubble chart in the report, and I'm thinking, wow, Guinea is incredibly green. They are the model of low-carbon sustainability.
And that is the carbon paradox.
It's an illusion, isn't it?
It is the absolute illusion of sustainability. I hate to burst that bubble, but we need a massive reality check here. Guinea's low carbon footprint is not the result of advanced green technology.
It's not because they have highly efficient public transit.
No. Or because they made a conscious, policy-driven pivot to renewable solar grids. It is the direct, unavoidable result of a sheer lack of industrialization. It is what we might call the low pressure of poverty.
The low pressure of poverty. Wow, that is a heavy concept.
It's the truth hidden in the data.
It means they aren't emitting carbon because they literally don't have the electricity grids to power homes, the manufacturing plants to build goods, or the logistics networks to move products. Their sustainability isn't a choice, it's involuntary.
Exactly. Let's connect the dots back to the MPI. When 66.2% of your population is in multidimensional poverty, lacking electricity, and using scavenged wood for cooking fuel, your industrial carbon emissions are going to be practically non-existent.
You can't emit industrial carbon if you don't have industry.
But here's the terrifying part. As Guinea pushes to improve its HDI, as it desperately tries to build those hospitals, pave those dirt roads into highways, and power those schools, its material footprint is inevitably inching up.
Right. We saw that with the material footprint going from 3.3 to 4.1 tons. This poses the ultimate 21st century development dilemma, doesn't it? Because for the last 100 years, the blueprint for a nation to raise its HDI, to get its people out of poverty, to increase life expectancy, and to boost income was to burn fossil fuels, industrialize rapidly, and consume massive amounts of material.
That's exactly how the global average got to 0.756.
It is the defining geopolitical question of our era. How can developing nations like Guinea industrialize, build wealth, and save their populations from multidimensional poverty without inheriting the massive planetary penalties of the developed world?
We were essentially asking them to leapfrog the dirty, carbon-heavy industrial revolution that made the West wealthy and somehow develop cleanly.
And we're asking them to do this often without providing the capital, the infrastructure, or the technology transfer required to actually pull it off.
The data shows Guinea is currently penalized very little by the PHDI, only 2.4%. But the tragedy is that they are penalized heavily by actual grinding poverty.
I want to pull all these threads together because we've gone on a massive journey across these spreadsheets today. There's a funnel chart at the end of the report that basically visualizes this whole bottleneck.
Right, synthesizing the core pain points.
We started with what looked like a monumental victory on that first page, pushing a national human development index up by 77.3% over 3 decades. But by dissecting the data set, by looking at the gaps between the numbers, we've seen the ghosts in the machine.
We saw that the 77% growth was an illusion of the low-hanging fruit, heavily offset by a devastating 39.6% inequality tax.
We saw that while expected schooling for children looks great on paper, the actual adults driving the economy right now are bottlenecked by a 2.5-year average education.
We saw that systemic barriers facing women, highlighted by that horrific maternal mortality rate and a low GDI rank of 156, mathematically handicap the nation's potential.
And we saw that a 66.2% multidimensional poverty rate proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that top-level economic growth on a national ledger does absolutely not automatically trickle down into human liberation.
It fundamentally redefines what development actually means.
Development isn't just about making numbers go up on a spreadsheet. It's not just about building a new road or increasing GDP. It's about removing the institutional, educational, and systemic barriers that keep people in the dark.
It's about building a society where the mean actually catches up to the expectation. And it requires us, as analysts and citizens, to constantly question the metrics we use to define success.
Because averages hide the marginalized.
Exactly. Growth percentages hide the baseline. If we want to understand the truth of a nation, we have to look at the overlapping realities of how people actually live, cook, study, and survive.
Which leaves you, listening right now, with one final, lingering question to mull over as we close out this deep dive. We've spent this entire time looking at how far Guinea has to climb to reach the global average.
That 0.756 target.
Right. We've treated that global HDI as the finish line. But looking at the massive environmental damage, the 10.1% planetary penalty incurred by the developed world just to reach that average.
It's a steep cost.
Were we absolutely sure the global average is the right finish line to be aiming for? Or, as countries like Guinea look to the future and try to build something new, do we need an entirely new model for what it means to be a developed human being?
It's something to think about the next time you see a jagged line on a chart pointing toward progress.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Keep questioning numbers.